So there was a POW MIA organization in Hanoi.
Mm-hmm.
And just the getting to experience traveling to a village in a Russian plane, by the way, that I was like, I don't know if this plane is going to hold together, but it did. So the whole camera crew and myself went to this village where they conducted a recovery of remains mission.
All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Eddie Live podcast. We are coming to you from Consensus in Hong Kong, and we just happened to meet a fantastic person at one of the events last night. Her name is Christina Pantin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Eddie. It was so nice meeting you last night, too.
It was my absolute pleasure. We were lucky to catch your AI panel right now. Congrats on that. Very successful. I think you controlled that very, very well.
I am a control person sometimes, maybe a little bit too much, but I had a very nice panel, I have to say. So all three of them just were able to work with me so smoothly. It was just not a lot of effort.
I think that you nailed it, saying that you had everything prepared, you had the notes, you had the questions sort of planned, which makes me a bit nervous because I'm like, hey, we're running gun style here. Yeah. But yeah, so maybe we can start at the beginning and you can kind of introduce yourself.
So I am Christina Pantin. I live here in Hong Kong, so we're having a lot of visitors for the Consensus Hong Kong first time conference here. I've had a life that's both been in journalism as well as in PR communications, so it's been a hybrid kind of thing. And I've also had the pleasure of living in different countries.
Yes.
At different points in my life.
Okay.
U.S. being a big chunk of it because I went to school there.
Okay.
And Asia Pacific because I was born and raised in Malaysia.
Okay.
And then spent some of my career both in journalism and PR in different countries here in Asia Pacific. But that's sort of me in a nutshell. I mean, I have a very long history, so we probably would run out of recording time if I went through the whole thing.
No, we love the long form style here. So yeah, definitely. These are the two things I really want to talk about is you personally, your history and like living in different countries, and also kind of your journalism style. So let's start with yourself, the personal stuff. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about the history. We talked yesterday and you mentioned about living in I think it was 6 or 8 different countries you had. So let's start with that. So you started in Malaysia, right?
Started in Malaysia.
Okay, so tell me a little bit.
Born in Kuala Lumpur. If you want to go back that far.
Sure,
in the capital
please.
City.
Okay.
And had the good fortune to be sent to do my university degrees in the U.S. So I got my journalism degree at West Virginia University, Go Mountaineers, and my master's degree in international affairs at Columbia University in New York. And then went into the job I always wanted, which was to be a journalist.
Beautiful.
And I think back about it and I don't exactly know why, because I did not grow up around any journalists. I did read a lot of newspapers in Malaysia and foreign publications. I understood the power of news, but something just pulled on me. And I landed up in Reuters in New York.
That's
and
amazing.
learning the ropes of financial journalism, which I also didn't think I would get into. But once I started going into that world, it was endlessly fascinating to me. And we were writing breaking news stories about company results, but also M&A, IPOs, you name it, anything that was important to a listed company in the U.S., and there's so many of them, big brand names, was something that we produced. So it was a very good training ground for me.
Okay.
To understand how businesses work, how share prices work, how the market works.
Okay.
So amazing education.
Beautiful. I think that you were saying that your family's not at all kind of involved in journalism, right? And so how do you think, what sort of pulled you into this thing? And like, this is a very, very different thing than what my family does.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
All I knew was that I felt that I was gifted as a writer.
Okay, sure.
And we're not talking about anything like major, but as a kid, I was encouraged by my parents to write. So whether it's poetry or short stories, fairly nonsensical stuff, honestly. But I also grew up reading a lot of good writing books. So we were bookworms, the 5 kids in my family.
Great.
It was a great habit to develop. And I felt, okay, I think I want to make my career about writing. So I didn't see myself as a novelist or even a writer of nonfiction. I just didn't see book author in my future.
Okay.
So I figured, well, journalism it is.
Okay.
And I guess that's what put me on that path.
Okay.
And I was also fortunate because sometimes growing up as an Asian in Asia, your parents have a lot of say in your path, in what you choose to do. And sometimes you don't get a choice.
Okay.
Depends on how traditional. But my parents were fairly untraditional in that sense. So they very much supported my going to school for it
Okay.
and then taking up the profession. And I was able to be gainfully employed despite fears and warnings from some well-meaning friends who said that I would starve to death as a journalist. I did not.
It's kind of like the starving artist thing. People are like, oh no, like the 1% of artists
Yes.
make it, right? Yeah. So I actually have a daughter as well, and my wife is Taiwanese, so she kind of has like that little battle between the,
Tiger mom-ish kind of
a little
thing.
bit, yeah. And you have that, and then you have me that's like, do your best. Let's do something. What do you like? So yeah, I can totally understand that. So it's my daughter kind of gets pulled both ways a little bit. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. Yeah. So your family encouraged you. You got into that. Now you're in Hong Kong, right? But before you got to Hong Kong, I know we had a few stories yesterday about there was a Vietnam, I believe. There's some cool stuff happening there. Let's talk a little bit about your time over there.
So I don't happen to think it's that remarkable, but I guess sometimes I forget that it was actually an unusual journey
Yeah.
and opportunity that
We call that
I
the gift, the curse of knowledge. You think everybody knows it because I know it, but actually,
Exactly.
please share.
I'm really close to it, so it kind of feels almost a little boring to me
Yeah,
like, to
understand.
recount it.
Yeah.
But the journalism decision actually brought me to a number of different places.
Okay.
So from New York, I went to Dallas, where I was the Dallas bureau chief. From there, I went on to Malaysia, where I was born, and had the interesting experience of being a foreign correspondent in the country in which I was born, and
That's cool.
covering the country after having been away from it for some time, maybe with fresh eyes,
Yeah.
but also with an understanding of the culture, the
Okay.
traditions, and the politics. So that was interesting in and of itself, a very different experience.
Was there when you go staying in the States and then going back to Malaysia, was there a little bit of a reverse culture shock?
There was,
Yeah?
I have to admit there was. I mean, fortunately, I retained my ability to speak Malay, the national language of Malaysia.
Okay.
My stomach was definitely still Malaysian.
Yeah.
You never grow out of that.
Of course.
My husband, fortunately, was very flexible in his location, so he enjoyed trying something very new.
Okay.
But there was that little bit of, okay, I haven't lived here all my life, I've been away, and now I can come with a different perspective, perhaps,
Okay.
and maybe a third-party viewpoint on things that are going on in the news that we're covering here.
Okay.
And that's what a news agency like Reuters would actually expect from you.
Beautiful.
That unbiased, view.
So you're in Malaysia. You're a foreign correspondent despite being a born and raised local. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first, having to apply for a foreign journalist visa was quite interesting. There are many countries in Asia, Malaysia notwithstanding, that will look quite closely at credentials, especially if you're a foreign correspondent. And they're protecting their own interests because,
Of course.
let's face it, as much as media try to be unbiased or say they are, it's sometimes hard to be that balanced. And I think that people outside of the West feel sometimes they haven't been portrayed fairly. So I don't hold it against any country that looks a little bit closely at foreign journalist credentials.
Yeah.
But I guess the advantage was having now experienced a different part of the world and different systems and the way news was covered differently. That helped me, I think, do and work differently in Malaysia had I just stayed there, I think, my whole life.
Okay. Sure.
And I did enjoy coming back, and being able to pick up a little bit at a very different stage in my life and in the country's life as well. So
Okay.
being part of a new prime minister, different leadership in Malaysia, we did experience the Asia currency crisis at that time. So that tells you how long ago this was. And that also was a huge global story, and being able to cover it from the place I was born in was also special.
Okay. I actually feel it. I've been living in Taiwan for 20 years. And when I come back to Taiwan, I always feel like I'm home, When I go back to Canada to visit, I love it. My family's there. I love Canada. My family's from Mexico. I love Mexico. But when I go back to Canada, I also feel that a little bit of that reverse culture shock. And I come from a really small town where it's a great place. I love it. And I love going to visit. But things don't change that much there. So, you go back to the one pub in town for, a couple of beers with your friends. And you see kind of like the same, it's like that mood, that TV show Cheers, the same people sitting around the bar.
Everybody knows your name.
Yeah, everybody knows your name, right?
Yeah.
They're a little bit grayer. And you walk in, you order a beer. And they're just like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. You still living up the hill?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I left a while ago. Yeah. But yeah, I get a little bit of a reverse culture shock, but it's a unique experience to be Canadian, born and raised, go back to Canada and have a reverse culture shock.
And your daughter is experiencing that in multiple ways as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's the interesting thing, the next generation and the generation after her.
Exactly. So U.S. to Malaysia. What came after Malaysia?
Oh, Lord, I hope we don't have to go through the whole CV.
No, just we want to get Vietnam.
Really
sure.
long.
Yeah.
After Malaysia, it was Singapore.
Okay.
Or a regional role. And after Singapore, I felt like, okay, I've been doing equities reporting, stock markets for quite a long time now. I am a specialist, but I want to do something different now. I don't want my whole career to be just stuck in this area. So I went for the job that was available at the time, which was to be the bureau chief for Vietnam.
Okay.
And I don't know why they picked me in the end. I mean, I didn't bring the credentials of having covered politics or being in a developing economy in that way and being responsible for that whole coverage.
Understood.
But they picked me.
Beautiful.
Lucky. So I was stationed in Hanoi, and that was a really interesting assignment because Vietnam was coming out into a more markets-based economy.
Okay.
As a number of sort of communist countries, have experienced.
Sure.
And they just set up a stock market. It was thriving in Ho Chi Minh City. I got to know a very small community of foreign correspondents like myself. We sort of banded together because there was strength in numbers. And sometimes it was a more effective way of getting information we needed. Okay. Because like many regimes in that area, they tended to be a little careful about how they conveyed information.
Of course.
And I was there during a couple of difficult moments, such as SARS. There was a SARS outbreak. There was a bird flu outbreak also. So we're talking about crisis moments when information tends to be then scarce.
Yeah.
And you're trying your best. But one of the most enjoyable parts and eye-opening for me versus my previous assignments was when you're in sort of a location where you're not going to always get that free flow of information.
Yeah.
How you make alliances and partnerships and collaborations with your fellow journalists, even if you compete against each other, which we did. There was Bloomberg, there was AP,
sure,
and so forth. But also with the diplomats. And that was my first exposure to working with people from the World Bank, but also with the different embassies.
Okay.
The Brits, the Europeans, the Americans, and how that sort of all came together, particularly in times of crisis.
Beautiful. And Dan was sharing a few stories that you mentioned to him about Hanoi in specific, right? Particular, yeah. And there was a couple that we really wanted to make sure we got, right?
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
yeah.
When you work in a place like Vietnam, which has such a rich history,
sure,
but also has a history of wars against foreign powers.
Yes,
okay,
of course.
The Vietnam War, like most Americans and maybe Canadians are familiar with that.
Sure, we are, yeah.
Which, of course, the Vietnamese call the American War.
I love that,
right?
Because that's
how they see it.
Yeah.
But also having fought against the French colonial powers. So I'd never been in a country that had that kind of a history. But interestingly to me, meeting so many Vietnamese who are very forward-looking. Now, granted, many of them were born after the American or the Vietnam War, so they didn't have that baggage.
Gotcha.
But overall, I have seldom met a more positive, can-do people in any place that I've been in. And I think that's what really made that assignment very memorable.
Okay.
So doing that, some of the more interesting stories were related to the war, or the war that had concluded some decades ago.
Yeah.
And while I was there to be in Ho Chi Minh City and have the first U.S. Navy ship pay a port call to Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon.
Yep.
The first one since the end of the war.
Okay.
I mean, you think about it, it's like, what? This is the first one? It was a huge story. CNN was
sure.
there, a lot of foreign media piled in.
Yep.
We traveled down south to cover it. So it's seldom again that you get to be in a place where you get to mark historical milestones like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And then another one that really was kind of special to me was the care that was taken to retrieve those who had died in Vietnam fighting the war, American
Yeah.
military. So there was a POW MIA organization in Hanoi.
Mm-hmm.
And just the getting to experience traveling to a village in a Russian plane, by the way, that I was like, well, I don't know if this place is going to hold together, but it did. So the whole camera crew and myself went to this village where they conducted a recovery of remains mission. And the painstaking way that they enlisted and paid villagers and relied on a lot of oral history and witness accounts from some people who were very old, actually, but who would say, okay, the plane, I saw the plane, the American plane crashing here, and then this is what happened to it. You know, there would be a long story around it. Oh, we buried them, you know, just because we were nervous about the situation. They had died.
Yeah.
But then some wild dogs dug up the body, and then we moved it. So it's like solving a mystery. It's very CSI-like, you know, you're trying to go back and trace. But the way that they would painstakingly sift through, you know, dirt, stones, twigs, and, you know, just to find tiny bits of bone,
Okay.
or what they thought was bone, you know, and try to identify, and using DNA and other sorts of things to see who did they belong to. Can we make a positive identification of this military person? And for me, one of the aspects of that whole story is also seeing the respect accorded to every single shipment of remains that goes back to the United States, and seeing members of the embassy, sometimes the ambassador himself, at the airport in Hanoi, a flag-draped coffin, the solemnity and the utmost respect for it.
So trying
I never served.
Trying to get the bones back.
Trying to get the
of
bones back
course,
to the family, to give them that
Family's
closure, but
closure.
also to give them that recognition of what their loved one had done, right? So that was, to me, just amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to top that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and I think that's very meaningful work, right? Because you were saying some families, they don't know what happened, I'm sure, right? And to get that closure, to be like, okay, his bones are back here, you know, back in our country,
And
That's
it's
amazing.
expensive.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
must be expensive
I
to do.
think that I heard, and I may be wrong, but I heard that it'll cost about $1 million for every person that
Every
they're
person.
trying to recover.
That's a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot, and
And then that was also back a few years ago as well, right?
some years ago.
Yeah.
And the fact that the country has deemed this money worth spending.
Yeah.
We're not going to leave them behind, so to speak. We're not going to forget about their sacrifice.
That's beautiful, though.
We're willing to do this.
Okay.
And I think I can't imagine what it feels like to be a family member who then receives this back.
Even watching a war movie is already like enough. Be like, oh my God, you're crying at the end. To have it actual in real life, that's crazy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit to Hong Kong,
Yeah.
right? Because we're in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
in Census Hong Kong, right? We just had your panel. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I know that yesterday we met at a pretty historical building for an amazing event. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about that and how you were involved with them.
Yeah, so I first joined the Foreign Correspondents Club in 2012. By that time, I'd already drifted over to what the journalists like to call the dark side.
All right.
And the dark side being the PR communications side of it. Many journalists end up being on the dark side.
Okay.
But that was my first job in Hong Kong, and I was working in the communications field. But I still, feel that journalists are my clan. They're my tribe.
Yep. You got to
So
find your tribe.
one of the first things I wanted to do as soon as I moved from actually India into Hong Kong.
Yeah.
My last assignment was in India for Reuters.
Oh, beautiful.
Bangalore, India. was to join the FCC. And the FCC is a storied organization. They were there as a refuge for, journalists who were on the front lines of covering wars. Some of the wars that I just referred to,
Sure.
in fact, the Vietnam War, the American War, but even the Korean War.
Okay.
So has always been that institution in Hong Kong that people could come to, to take a rest, to commune with their fellow journalists, to stand for some of the standards of journalism that a lot of us revere: freedom of the press, transparency, information, keeping institutions accountable. So they do great work.
Okay.
And I was so pleased last night to meet you,
Yeah.
to meet Dan.
My pleasure.
At what is a very historical building in Central, in Hong Kong.
We were in awe of that building. It was gorgeous.
It's a beautiful building. They've kept it, and in these days where they tear down a lot of the old buildings, it was obviously built during colonial times. It used to house dairy farm, which was, as you can tell from, they had milk storage from farms where they had cows. They were trying to bring milk into households at that time in the early 20th century. But they've kept the building, they've kept it going. You can see some of the original details, whether it's some of the wooden shutters of the building, the unique bandage. If you ever stand outside it again,
Okay.
there's brickwork as well as white. And it actually looks like the building is bandaged through the brickwork,
That's
which is kind of
beautiful.
like an orange building. The FCC has been proud to be the leaser of that building and has maintained it really well. It takes a lot of care to make sure that the building is well kept up, as long as we're renting the premises from the government.
Sure.
And some of the details that you saw and that Dan saw were on the veranda, just always been there. And hopefully will always be there for as long as we're in it. We can't say how long we'll be there, but hopefully it will be our home for good.
Okay.
And it's just a great gathering place for journalists, but as well as non-journalists. And I think that our community in that club on the membership is all the richer for the fact that we have many people from different walks of life.
Okay. I just actually want to touch on the story you were telling me last night about when they were kind of bringing that building back to life. And, the bricks, they were looking for the right bricks for the place. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah,
Because I found that amazing.
I found it amazing too.
Yeah.
So I volunteered to write an article for the quarterly publication of the FCC called The Correspondent.
Gotcha.
And we wanted to make sure that we showcase the improvement, renovation work that had been done at the club just recently. So I was thinking, okay, this is probably not going to be the most exciting assignment I've ever done, but let's do it.
Yeah.
But I was so surprised because when I talked to the project manager, to hear the painstaking care they took to make sure that everything still looked as original as they could.
Because the easy way would just be patch it up.
Patch it up, right?
Like a
Use
fancy
whatever.
car, Bondo it up or whatever, right?
Exactly.
But they did not
They
do
did
that.
not do that. So when they discovered there was some bricks that needed to be replaced, because it sits at a very busy, on a fairly busy road, and over time, things have eroded. They didn't just go find the nearest, most convenient brick maker in Hong
Cheapest
Kong.
one, like give
Or
us the cheapest
China.
brick, yeah, or China.
They did the research and found the original brick maker in England.
Amazing.
I mean, we're talking about centuries ago.
Yeah.
And the amazing part to me was that they're still in
They're
business.
still in business.
They're still in business.
That's longevity in the
They
business.
contacted them and said, hi, we need to match perfectly the original bricks. Can you help us?
You still have that brick from 18...
I know, seriously, right? But
Yeah.
they sent over several samples
Wow.
of different colors just to make sure that these were perfect bricks, perfect matches. The other thing that they did, which I'm learning things about renovation I never thought I would, is they did what is called like a dentist method of fixing it. So for the bricks that could be salvaged, and they were always trying to keep to the original, what they would do is if the outer layer of the brick was eroded or somehow damaged, they turned it around so that the
Beautiful.
inward-facing part was now the outward-facing part.
Pretty side out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was still good, and that was a way of just keeping that original brick in there.
Wow.
But the fascinating part of it was if I were that brick, I'm the original one, and it's the first time I'm seeing the outside world after being inside
It's
for
like
so
brand
long.
new on that
Yes,
side.
it was like brand new because it'd been preserved and kept intact. So I got so much out of that story. I can't even tell you. That was one of the most fun stories I ended up doing, and I never imagined it would be the case.
It's amazing because you think, oh, okay, I'll do this one. And then it becomes this amazing story of
Yeah, much more than I bargained for.
bricks coming in from England to Hong Kong to preserve this natural beauty.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But that was how much respect the FCC has for the house that we live in. And it wasn't just going to be some piecemeal patchwork kind of thing, but wanting to do the best effort possible. And the people involved was just, I mean, they used also, magnetic imaging just to see things. So it was also, what I loved about it also was the combo of using technology that was now technology.
Yeah.
They used a drone as well because they need to inspect the roof. There were some tiles on the roof that needed to be replaced. So drones, magnetic imaging,
Beautiful.
all the way to the foundational stuff, which is the original brick maker. So that combination of old and new was fascinating to me.
That's wonderful. So speaking of new, we're, again, Hong Kong consensus. How does crypto tie into, your life now? And tell me a little bit about what you're kind of doing at Consensus in Hong Kong.
Well, crypto is only in my portfolio a little bit, not much.
Gotcha, gotcha.
I'm by no means a Bitcoin billionaire or millionaire,
Oh, shoot.
but I've had it in my history having worked for a crypto exchange in Hong Kong as the head of communications. So that was my entry point into this fascinating world. At Consensus, I've had the pleasure of moderating one panel this morning about trust in AI,
AI, yeah.
which is a really big topic. We
Great
could have
topic.
talked for an hour. And I'm later on going to moderate a panel all about decentralized AI, which melds together the world I came from, blockchain, DeFi, etc., into the newest kid in town, the AI part of it. Where it now features in my life is mainly through Web3 Women. Web3 Women is a nonprofit in Hong Kong. We were founded in Hong Kong. Most of our members are here. We have some members in Singapore. But basically, we thought there was room to create a group that would bring together women who work in different areas of Web3,
Beautiful.
whether it's blockchain, digital assets, the metaverse, NFT, what have you, crypto. We all happen to be doing different kinds of work within those fields. So I probably am the only one who's in the communications media front. But we have people who manage portfolios, who are the chief technical officers. And our aim is pretty simple. As you can tell from the name, we want to make sure that there is representation of very smart women in the upper echelons of businesses in this growing field.
Okay.
I mean, let's face it, if you look at some of the TradFis, the banks and Wall Street, they really haven't come that far, honestly. I mean, in terms of gender representation.
Yep.
So we're in a young industry, so we want to start now
I think that's
and
fantastic.
build that in and not try to fix it like 10 years or 20 years down the road. It's really hard to fix.
I think it's wonderful, honestly, because just being here, checking out all the booths and stuff, I would say it's probably 95% men. Women, it's coming in, which is good. And I think, I have a daughter, right? So I believe that, the equal rights and representation is super
Absolutely.
important.
We bring different perspectives as well. So, I mean, we all come from different ways. I'm not saying men don't, but I think that, this is the time to sort of get it right from the start. And we do a lot of educational things. So we'll do classes or one-on-one situations of trying to understand what is an NFT, et cetera, sort of to go to women who are not in the field, but are just curious about it and want to learn more. And we're not about growing big. We're not trying to be global. We're not trying to take over the world, but we are wanting to work in our part of the world, which is Hong Kong and Asia Pacific, and bring up that representation here.
Okay, I have one more question for you. I'm curious about how's the response when you're approaching or you're chatting with maybe your Web2 women friends about what you're doing with, Web3 women, trying to bring more women on? Because I know that, for example, like my wife and my friends' wives, they don't really, they're not that interested. They're just like, not that interested right now. So I'm curious about what's the kind of the response of, let's say, the average Web2, woman that you find, trying to get her into the Web3.
That's a good question. I mean, I think that, there is a certain level of lack of confidence, like,
Okay.
wow, this is so hard, it's so complicated, and you have to say, no, it's actually not, and let me help you understand it. But I think once they latch onto the fact that you can understand it, I mean, look, if they say that they can't, say, let me tell you, their kids understand it.
Yeah, well, that's, yeah.
Without
Remember that.
any sort of like boundaries, that
It's always
kids are
that cycle.
already adopting it almost like natives. So, take the plunge. I'm the kind of person who likes new stuff. Maybe that's terrible. It's a curse.
No, it's beautiful.
But because I'm always curious about what's new, I jump in feet first. But I always say take the first step. There are so many resources available for free now. You don't have to take a class, a master class, or spend lots of hours doing it. I learned by just reading. I mean, there's practically no one who comes directly from crypto or blockchain into any company. All of us learn from scratch.
True.
So I always say that it's very possible. I did it. I had to learn really fast, but anyone can do it. And I think it's just the next step in sort of our world, and you need to stay on top. If anything, just to keep up with your kids. You probably know.
Okay,
having a
yeah,
daughter.
true.
You want to stay one step ahead of her.
Okay. And so if people want to find you, Web3 Women, or communicate with you, how can they find you?
Hit me up on LinkedIn. I mean, that is the social media. I am on Telegram, okay, because I know that's the preferred platform. I am there, but I use it mostly to just monitor things. As far as posting more actively and telling people what I'm up to, find me on LinkedIn.
Okay, so we will have all of the description below with all your links in there. Is there anything that you want to add before we call it?
Oh, I think I've talked up a storm.
Oh, you're wonderful. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
And we will definitely be out to check out your next panel. First one was
Fabulous.
fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks, Eddie.
All right.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you guys
Thank
for
you.
watching, and we'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.